Okay, now at this point, I want to introduce my friend and associate, Stephen Shore. We've known each other how many years now?
Probably edging on 6.
6 years, and we're still talking to each other, which really says something very nice. Now, Stephen has had an extraordinary background. I'm going to highlight a few features. Until age 4, Stephen was completely nonverbal. He was diagnosed as atypical with strong autistic features.
Right.
And they were ready to refer you to a residential program.
Correct.
Or in fact, insisting at it at Putnam, as I call, and your mother protested.
Yeah, she did.
And kept you home, and worked with you intuitively. And we will talk about some of the things she did later. And currently, you're third-year doctoral student at Boston University.
I think it's 4.
The 4th year.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're an ABD, which means everything but the dissertation.
That's right.
Okay. So Stephen presents in his existence some of the possibilities that are there for people who have been profoundly disordered and, in a sense, put in the category of having to go to a residential program. Now, Stephen, you've lived the program. How did you first come across us? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I had met a teacher at a Temple Grandin conference presentation who worked at LCDC. I asked if I could come and observe, and she said fine. And at that time, I just was beginning my research into methodologies and working with autistic children. And the first thing that I was struck by was that everything seemed to be very right with the program. From the idea of heavy parental involvement, being able to go in at any time as a parent to observe, working closely with the children, getting them to move around a lot. After a period of time, the teacher asked me if I'd like to observe from inside the room, which I thought was pretty neat, but I also wondered about my presence disturbing the class. But I went in, and then the teacher asked me if I'd take a shoe off of the kid, and so I involuntarily became a volunteer. And it seemed to be a good thing to do, so I continued. And that's what led me into continued research, writing my book, Beyond the Wall, which Dr. Miller was, you could officially consider him as the first editor, because he gave me the idea, why don't you write a book? And I thought, yeah, right, I know how hard it is to get published, but Dr. Miller persevered. I wrote it. We shuffled versions back and forth, I think about 13 of them.
At least.
And I eventually found a publisher and got it published. So it's my pleasure and also my honor to continue work with the Miller Method.
You've in your book and in your experience, some of the things as you've looked at our program here sort of resonate with your own experience as we were doing the elevated board work. And I think in previous conversations you've mentioned some parts of that spoke to you.
Yes.
Do you remember some in particular that?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind in particular is the edge experience that comes from being on an elevated structure. And if we think about, say I ask you to walk from the back of the room to me on an 18-inch wide piece of wood, now you'll think nothing of it. You won't even look down at your feet. Well, let us suppose we raise that piece of wood up to about the height of the arms of the chairs. Are you going to pay more attention to your feet? What if that piece of wood was 100 feet in the air? You pay a lot of attention. Well, we don't need to stick the kids that far up. But as for me, I remember one of my favorite activities was to climb a tall tree a few houses down from my house, up to a height of probably about 40 or 45 feet. The trunk was about this thick. And then the wind would blow and it would go back and forth, and I'd be terrified, but also there was a sense of increased body to environmental awareness after that. I also think that's what people look for when they go skydiving. I had a friend that went skydiving, and then he told me that everything seemed so much brighter and
Vivid.
Yeah, vivid. His perception of the environment was just so much more vivid afterwards. So that is how elevation struck me. It seemed to make a lot of sense.
So that resonated. Now, I talked about the body world experience also in fusion. Could you
Right.
give some experiences of your own that relate to that?
Yeah, fusion. One experience in particular, or a category of experiences in particular, I think about as echolalia, as you mentioned earlier, and that is the unconscious, unprocessed repetition of sound from the environment. You fuse with them and you make the same sound. And what I see in myself is not so much echolalia anymore, but residuals of echolalia. And as I talk to other people that are on the autism spectrum, such as Leanne Willie and others such that do presentations and write books, such as I do, one of these residuals involves imitation. I am very good at imitating, I am telling you. You know, that was conscious imitation. But unconscious imitation is, it can be a problem
It
sometimes.
can be embarrassing
It can be
sometimes.
embarrassing. I remember one time I worked at a college where I had an African American dean. She spoke in an African American accent. And soon I'd be echolaliaizing that back. She'd call me a homie, so I'd call her a homie. She'd call me a brother. I'd call her a brother. I suppose I should have called her a sister. So that's a little embarrassing. The third type, which is perhaps the most subtle, but also the most important, is echo-emotica, as I call it. And that is fusing
This is your label for it?
That's my label.
Echo-emotica?
Echo-emotica.
Okay.
That's right. Right, emotions. And what people say that there's a misconception that people on the autism spectrum don't perceive emotions. But in actuality, they do, and perhaps they even maybe more strongly than with typical people. And the reason why is what happens with me is often I may get a very strong emotion that is out of context with the environment. So what I have to do is look around and ask, for example, my wife, are you feeling anxious or upset about something today?
Well, you've not experienced anything that makes you feel that you should have that emotion.
Right,
But you have the emotion anyhow, and you picked it up somewhere.
right,
Is
it's
that
out of context.
out of context?
Right.
You got an example of that?
What?
An example?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about now.
Okay,
So,
all
for
right.
example, my wife is feeling agitated or upset. So I'm feeling agitated or upset. And then I have to figure out, why am I feeling this way? Did something happen yesterday, the day before? I don't see anything. It doesn't make sense to feel that way. So then I have to look around in the environment, ask my wife, are you feeling such and such? And often she'll say, yes, I am feeling such and such. And then what I'm able to do suddenly is separate myself from that emotion. I can still feel whatever she's feeling for her. And that's what empathy is.
But you don't own it anymore.
I
It's
don't
not
own
yours.
it. And we sense that when we work with children. We know that if we're having an off day, if we get up on the wrong side of the bed that day, that it's going to reflect on the children we work with, and they're also going to be off that day. Copy machines are also autistic because whenever we're in a rush, they always break down, need paper, need toner. Another interesting thing about systems, is that seems to make a lot of sense too. You know, right down to doing what I call pixel analysis, where if I see just one extra space between words or a graphic that's off by 1 pixel, which is 1/72nd of an inch, or 1/90th of an inch, depending upon whether you're using Macintosh or Windows, and I'll see it. But the important thing, what I feel is important, is that I'm able to see it. It does bother me, but I'm able to dominate that system instead of it dominating me. Exactly.
The interesting thing is he cannot go for content until he's done a pixel analysis. Then he can read the darn thing, and you get impatient with him. Come on already, how many pixels are you going to find there?
All of them.
Which brings up the issue of closed system and if you had to characterize yourself in your early development, how would you put yourself in
I characterize myself more in the closed system.
more closed system? How did it
Right.
show itself?
Well, as a child, I remember my parents were building a second floor to our home. And one part of me was fascinated by the construction. And my parents probably saw that, so my mother brought me up the unfinished staircase to the unfinished second floor, which still had a window where the attic was. But it was as if the wall was built around it, and the window was either going to be removed or incorporated into the new structure. And that was just so upsetting that I had a big old tantrum, and we never made it up the stairs. So
Well,
that's,
that was one example.
That's
Did
one
you have your own
example.
rituals? Did you, as a kid?
yeah, I certainly had my own rituals, things I had to do. One of them was, for example, having to wipe my face after every bite.
I didn't know that. That's a new one.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
Yeah, one
After every bite.
after every bite. And and it's hard to say if that was more of a system or perhaps it was due to a sensory issue.
Because the stem, maybe. Not quite.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't something that filled up empty space, as we talked about, between activities. So it was something that had to be done after every bite.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that stemmed from a sensory issue, not being able to handle food on my face, on my hands, or anything else. In more extreme cases, I know of a child who's nonverbal, pretty severely affected. And if a piece of food is left on his lip while he's eating, he cries. But he doesn't have enough body to environmental awareness to realize that he could just wipe that away with his hand or a napkin.
Mm-hmm.
But the feeling, probably a rather diffuse feeling, is just so overwhelming to him.
Well, stem issues still continue with you in
Yes.
a variety of ways. I remember the time we had a pizza together, and
Right.
I happily ate the whole pizza, and then I noticed pretty soon that you're leaving a little semicircle of the crust all
Right.
around your side of the plate, and you explained to me what that was about.
Right. It was what I call a tactile violation. Like the crust is too hard. And other examples of such tactile violations are, for example, carrots cut up into discs in a salad.
Can't handle it.
Can't handle it. I'll eat the salad. I can actually eat a salad with one hand and have a carrot stick in the other, and switch back and forth. But you put the two together, and there's too much of a contrast.
I understand.
Wait, in the texture?
The
Between
texture.
the lettuce
The texture.
and the carrots.
Right. But if the carrots are shaved, then that's fine. I like that.
And your skin is still very sensitive, and
There's still skin sensitivities and pretty picky. Yeah, we'll get to that too. I'm pretty picky about the clothes we wear. For example, I purchase a shirt that has to be washed before I wear it because clothes in the United States are treated with formaldehyde, probably to preserve them. Go into a department store and that's the smell. In Brazil, when I went down there, I had a great time because they don't treat their clothes with formaldehyde. I could wear them right off the shelf.
how about ties? How come you're not wearing a tie?
That's another tactile violation.
Okay.
I don't like clothes that are tight. Other examples.
I didn't want to make him feel bad, so I didn't wear one either. So.
No. Sound sensitivities.
Your hearing is extraordinarily acute.
Yes.
Would you give the example of the clock?
The clock is a good one.
Louis?
Yeah, with my wife. We have a wind-up travel alarm clock that she uses to time her practice sessions on the clock. And she'd use it and then leave it out on the table afterwards. And I see you making a funny face there. How many people like the sound of a ticking clock? How many people don't like the sound of a ticking? All right, how many people here are autistic? The important point there is that everybody has autistic tendencies. So some people have more, and when there's so many of them that they interfere with functioning on a daily basis, then you have to consider a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I'd come in, hear this clock ticking, I'd close the thing up and put it under a chair cushion. Gone. Then I'd go out, take a class, do some research, whatever, come back at the end of the day. My wife would be storming around the house, insisting, where's the clock? Where'd you put the clock? Oh, it's under the chair. Doesn't everybody put their clock there?
But you heard the sound also.
Yeah, I could hear it. And even now, when we think about this room, how many of you hear the sound of the ventilation?
Oh, I do.
How many of you hear the sound of the speakers buzzing? How many of you hear the sound of this fan doing its thing?
He does.
Yeah. I often do that when I present, when there's a big crowd in front of me. There might be 500 or 1,000 people. And when I start talking about stimming, I'll start pointing, oh, you're stimming over there. Oh, you're busted. And again, the real difference is that adults have learned to self-stim in a socially acceptable way.
The bouncing foot is a stem?
That's a stim. You're going at it. You're doing a good job. Comments about the word good job, too. We'll get to that later. So stimming, that's another one. Adults figured out how to do it in a socially acceptable way. What do we need to do with our children? We need to morph these stims into more functional behavior. And if this is getting in the way, maybe there's some sort of squeeze ball that could be used instead. So it's a question of redirection.
Well, transformation whenever possible, but redirection as a second order solution.
Yeah, that's a good hierarchy.
Right, getting on with your life. Shaving was hard for you too, because
Yes.
and that's how the beard came about.
Right, I've tried shaving a few times, it just wasn't worth it. It hurt too much. So growing a beard was a good way around that one.
Mm-hmm.
That was another tactile violation.
As a child, you get that.
Oh yeah, how many of you know children where the parents have to wait until the child's asleep and they cut one side of the head and then they turn over and hopefully get the other side with a nice over. That was a big problem. And why are haircuts so difficult? It hurts.
And sound is sitting there, starting crazy.
Well, for some children, it's the scissors or the electric cutter. For other children, it's the light touch of the hair falling on the back of their neck. For me, it was actually the pulling of the hair on the scalp. When hair gets cut, it gets cut one hair at a time.
Pulls.
And then the shampoo that would occur afterwards, it felt like my mother was using, had sewing thimbles at the end of her fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
And that hurt too.
How do you think? What do you think were the conditions which made for you to do as well as you had? What did your mom do that was particularly helpful?
If you were to look at what she did, and at that time there was no early intervention, there was no Miller method, there was no Autism Society of America. So you can only characterize what she did in today's terms. And in today's terms, we'd call that an early intervention program, home-based early intervention program, emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation.
She did that all intuitively.
All intuitively. She just did what she felt her parents needed to do.
And she'd call you, you'd be out playing, and she'd say, she'd call your name, Stephen, and you wouldn't respond, so you wouldn't hear her?
Right.
What was that all about?
What that was all about is often when we work with kids, they seem to not be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we call out their name. Nothing. Dr. Miller. Nothing's there. Nobody's home. Dr. Miller. There he is. And what that is punching into a child's zone of intention. And most people have an unlimited zone of intention, so you don't even think about it. You can see me, no matter how far back you are, you can still see me. You can perceive me. So with children on the spectrum, the zone of intention might be this big, might be this big. If we think about the swinging ball subtest of the Umwelt, it may be right up against their body, and they still may not even be aware of the ball until it hits them.
While most people get, I know I get sick of the swing, like
That's because for people on the autism spectrum, that viscous fluid in the ear that helps us keep our balance is thicker than in other people. So for example, when a friend and I were at Disney World a couple of weeks ago, Cassiana to be specific, we went on all of the big proprioceptive vestibular rides. And one of them that we went on was the teacups. And there's a thing in the middle that you can spin. And we let that thing spin just about as fast as we could. And neither of us got dizzy, and I noticed that she made eye contact after that. She's incredibly averse to eye contact.
You might, while you're talking about her, you may indicate how she responded at the Autism Society that we were both at,
Oh, yes.
and when with all the stimuli.
Yeah, it was an overload, is what it amounted to.
How did she behave?
She behaved like an autistic kid. Yeah, good. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Covering the ears, rocking.
And she had a hat on, and she pushed it down over her eyes, so she
right,
couldn't
be
take
down
it.
like this.
And
There was one, a hallway, a passageway that we decided to name the Matthew Israel Memorial Hallway. If you don't know who he is, he's involved with the verses and all sorts of other ugly things. Matthew Israel?
Oh, yeah. He's still
what about him?
Yeah, he's still around.
The noise and the.
Yeah, aversives, to maximal aversives. So we renamed the hall the Matthew Israel Memorial Hallway because it was pure white, fluorescent lights,
Which were flickering.
which were flickering. So think of a TV with the contrast turned all the way down, so there's no contrast, blinding light. You can't figure out where things end and where they begin. So what I had to do is I had to grab her around the shoulder like this, with a lot of force, so that she could feel where her body was.
Held her strong.
Yeah, I held her quite strong and guided her towards the elevator at the other end.
And she moved along almost like a blind person, you know.
Yeah, she
that
did.
She couldn't. It was really touching to see. Steve was firm with her, but very gentle and supportive. You have a natural understanding of that phenomenon.
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Can we move from there to the point where you recognize in your life that the world was there versus a time when you weren't aware of your surroundings? What do you remember of that?
Trying to think back of a specific experience.
This is before you were taking apart clocks and putting them together again.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking like way back at, say, around 2.5, when I was nonverbal. And at that time, the memories are just more pictures. Sometimes still, sometimes
What
moving.
pictures did you remember?
For example, one picture is, for example, one of my bureau drawers and the clothes that were in those drawers. That's one example. Pictures of my family interacting with my brother, who was diagnosed with mild to moderate retardation. There's an interesting story there, too, on the swing set.
Uh-huh.
That involved sensory issues. My brother and I were playing on a swing set, parallel play. I hung upside down on one of the metal bars for summer. The cold bars against the back of my knees was just too much of a shock to my system, which resulted in cancer and head pain and having to go to the emergency room. And my brother was given a good yelling at afterwards. And it wasn't until I was working on my book about 5 years ago when I recounted this to my parents. And then she told me that she thought my brother was involved. I said, no, the only thing he had to do with it is that he was about 7 feet away from me. He had nothing to do with it at all.
Well, what was the factor? What did get you?
The factor was the cold bars in the back of the knees.
It was
a sensory overload.
And it was so much, so severe that you had to do something. You banged your head.
Right. So that was what resulted. One thing I find intriguing about the Miller method is that it takes into account sensory issues. It's integral. We came up with a rather elegant definition of autism a few years ago, which said autism is anything that interferes with the central nervous system in getting the needed information from the environment. And that makes a lot of sense. If the data that comes in is distorted, how can you depend upon it reliably? And I think that's also what may lead to some repetitive behaviors, because it's hard to interact with new stimuli from the environment if it's unreliable, if it's distorted. So it's just easier to do the same old thing over and over.
Do you believe that autism is neurological versus biological?
I think it's neurobiological.
Yeah, so do I.
Both.
Because I know that there's controversy over whether it is one or the other.
That's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be cases where it's more one than the other, but I think it's both involved.
Do you think your brother played a role in your recovery, that we haven't talked about
No, we
this
never
before.
have.
But what do you think? Was he important in your getting better or getting more into the world?
I think so.
How? Go into that.
Well, I was the last of 3 children, but in a way I was also sort of the middle, because my brother, who's 2 years older than I am, as I said, was diagnosed with mild to moderate retardation. I think there's some autism thrown in there for spice. But he didn't get, I guess my parents weren't aware of what was going on then. I'm not sure why, perhaps it's more severe. And I think my interactions with him, someone who I spent a lot of time with, also helped me learn how to interact with the world. He certainly interacted differently than most people do.
Was there wrestling between you two, or rough and tumble? Was that part of it?
Yeah, we did plenty of rough and tumble.
Okay.
So you get some good body to environmental awareness out of that.
All right.
And just the idea of communicating even though necessarily it wasn't with words.
Did you ever develop a friend outside or a buddy outside of your brother when you were growing up? Do you remember your first friend?
It was hard to make friends. And I'm talking about the public school, during public school.
So no one came over to sleep over or anything like that? Or?
A couple of times.
Okay. It didn't stick? It didn't
Didn't
go?
really stick. I can count the times on my left hand and still have some fingers left over. So it didn't happen too often.
You never really had a buddy
Right.
as you were growing up. In school, was there a friend that...
More transient.
Okay.
It's probably the way to
No
put it.
bosom buddy that you can share things with or talk about and
Right,
stuff like that. Okay.
right.
Were you aware of being very lonely?
I think I was aware of being different.
Had that show itself?
Let's see, aware of being alone, but not necessarily lonely. That's probably the best way to put it. Because I wasn't really interested in what all of my classmates were doing. And we see this commonly with people on the autism spectrum. Why is it that the little kid with autism gets along better with their older siblings' friends and with adults, but not people of their own age? And I think some of that has to do with differences in culture.
How did the kids view you? How did they make fun of you, or was there any of that?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of making fun of, a lot of teasing.
What they call you?
Usually they called me faggot.
Okay.
That's what they called kids who were different then. And probably some other things that don't immediately come to mind.
And you reacted to that? And you remember?
Yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't like it when they did that.
I remember you said something about a siren that came up in...
Oh yeah, that's more echolalic type stuff.
You
Friday
were in
afternoon
the classroom and there was a siren,
Right.
a police siren or
Not
something.
a police siren, but a Friday afternoon air raid siren. It would go off every Friday. So one day I heard that sound while I was in the classroom and I imitated that sound, sort of like a dog. And I wasn't even aware of it until I noticed that everybody looking at me and laughing. So that stuck around for quite a while.
And so the friends it's taken years to develop friends, and now in
Yeah.
your organization, you're president of the Asperger Association
Right.
in New England, and so you have friends in that milieu, and I know that you brought people to workshops and that you had some ongoing relationship with them.
Yeah.
And would you talk about the difference between email and being personal contact and what?
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It took a while to figure out how to make friends. Probably not until college, because at that time people are more interested in people as they are, as opposed to how similar they are, cliques and groups. Also, email, as you mentioned, email and chat can be easier for people with autism because there's only one communication channel on, you might say. Whereas direct interaction like this is more difficult because not only is there the verbal, there's the decoding of the tone of voice, there's all these nonverbal body language communication things going on, and that can be overwhelming. and distracting, which may be why people on the spectrum are aversive to eye contact, because it takes too much away from processing. Yeah.
You said you have 2 siblings, you're
Yes.
the youngest of 3.
Right.
You're the oldest sibling, how is she?
She's 4 years older than I am, and I get the sense that she got all of the typical genes. So she's
She's doing
pretty
okay?
typical. Yeah, she's doing okay. She's married, she's got 3 kids, and living a very typical life.
Was she empathetic for you growing up?
Well, it's an interesting question. She was very empathetic to me as I was growing up, but at this time, she doubts the autism, and she seems as if she's stuck in DSM, in the era of the DSM-3.
Okay.
Because I remember mentioning to her that I was writing a book or doing a conference or something. She said, you don't want people to know
Oh, so she still
you're
has
autistic.
that. She still has that.
That's a
That's a no-no.
psychological disorder, and you know psychological disorders are cyclical. I mean, you might be okay now, but people might be afraid you relapse or something. 40, hold on a minute.
46, no, 44?
No, 42.
42, okay.
Yeah, I was 41 for a while, so I must be 42 now.
You know exactly how old you are.
But you know, I remember in your book you describe in terms of relationships how your folks were trying to encourage you to get interested in the opposite sex, and there was this girl riding on the bike. Do you remember that experience?
Oh yeah. My parents were always very accepting of who I was, but in combination, they knew there were things to work on and things that needed to be developed, you might say. So we could probably consider them as a high support, high demand category. About dating in the opposite sex. In high school, my parents thought it might be good if I dated a particular person in the band. I was in the school band, which also speaks to interests. Youth and special interests, they're important. To me, music was a special interest then, so I could find a way to interact through that. So I actually called this
Why did
woman
you
up.
tell the group what instrument you chose?
Oh, trombone. Yeah. And I think that's good for body to environmental awareness, proprioceptive input, because there are no stops or clicks. It's the way you put the slide. Like for a trumpet, for example, you push the valve down and you aim for the note, and if you're close, you'll get it. With the trombone, you have to use your ear to put it in the
You
right
make
place.
the note. You make
Yeah,
the note.
that's right. You have to make it. So anyways, I called her on the phone, asked her if she wanted to go out. No, she didn't want to go out. She was flattered. Called her a second time. She said, I don't think it would work well if we dated. Okay, no big deal. It wasn't until college that I dated again. Although I don't know, if you don't know you're dating, I'm not sure if you can call it dating. And I'll tell you why. There was this woman that I met during a summer session, and she wanted to talk. She seemed to like to talk to me a lot. Okay, fine, so I talked to her. And one day she mentioned that she liked hugs and back rubs. And as a person who's continually seeking deep pressure, fine. If you want to give me a hug, I'll give you a hug back. And it was eventually became sort of like an echopractic dance. She'd give me a back rub, I'd give her a back rub. I'd do something for her, I'd give her a neck rub, she'd give me a neck rub. So sometimes we'd have dinner together. One night she'd asked if I'd like to sleep at her house. So I did that. Great. It's like having your own walking, talking Temple Grandin squeeze machine. Although I didn't know if those existed then. Well, anyway, so we went to sleep, even shared a bed, then woke up the next day, and soon she became quite frustrated. She was crying and talking, and it took me a while to figure out what she wanted. Oh, you want to be my girlfriend? So, and I didn't want to be her boyfriend. So she was one of these people that talking to the phone, you have to hold the phone way out here. She talks too loud.
But she was too abrasive, is that it?
Too abrasive. And I wasn't considering her, I didn't consider myself dating then. She thought she was dating me. So it's a little bit hard to say if that's my first dating experience or not. And I went out with a couple of other women, and then after that, met my wife, or to-be wife.
Why don't you explain how you met her?
Yeah,
at
I'm going
school?
to. Yeah, and this is how I met her. We met at during a master's program in music education. So there's the common interest again, a way to meet people. We ended up taking a class by chance, and she'd asked me if I'd help her with homework, particularly the English aspects. Okay, I agreed. Why would I need to help her with English? She comes from the People's Republic of China. She had been in the United States for 18 to 24 months. So there were a lot of English challenges. And at that time, I also thought it was quite interesting to be able to communicate with someone where English interaction in the English language maybe wasn't the primary way of communicating. So we do that. We had what I call homework dates. We'd agree to get together, do homework, check each other's homework, and then split. Well, then she invited me to a Chinese New Year, which I thought, gee, that's great. I like other cultures. I like food. I was there. So I thought I'd demonstrate good social skills and invite her to something. I did. One day I invited her to a musical study group that my parents had on Cape Cod. So while on the way to Cape Cod, she asked to stop at the beach. We did. We went out to the end of a long pier, and then she gave me a big hug and a kiss and held my hand. So at that time, I had pretty much had the social story figured out. If a woman hugs you, kisses you, and holds your hand, it probably means they want to be a girlfriend, and you're better.
Intuitively, you sensed something was going on.
Not really.
No, not really.
No. But that's when it all clicked.
Okay.
So you'd better be ready to say yes, no, or further investigation and
started-
analysis is needed.
Okay.
But it seemed to be a good thing to do, and eventually we got married. Now what happened with me is that I didn't perceive any of the social cues that go along with dating.
Right.
And I depended upon the woman to use cranial concussive therapy method in order to make her intentions known. The cranial concussive therapy method usually used that with small kids, and you just take a 2x4 to their head and you get immediate compliance, right? So that's what they'd have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
How long have you been married now?
We've been married for 13 years,
Okay.
almost 13 and a half now. And it's been quite an experience.
I bet.
Yeah.
Could you go into one particular bump you've had that you've gotten through?
Oh yeah, one bump actually has to do with autism itself. Before we married, and we were at the fiance level, you might say, my parents would spend a lot of time showing her pictures of me when I was younger. And I guess due to the language problem, my wife never quite got exactly what it was. And finally she said, well, whatever you had that time, I guess that's closing disease. She called it closing disease.
Closing.
Closing. Which is interesting because the Chinese translation for autism is closing disease. We'd say the word autism, but it just didn't mean anything to her. So she didn't connect the two. And we just left it at that. And then, say about 5-6 years ago, about the time when I met Susan and learned about LCDC, I'm becoming more interested in autism. And there we go. Nice music.
Nice one?
Music.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I tried to explain to her some more. She still didn't quite get it. Well, then I found a website that had about 10 pages of introductory autism information translated into Chinese. And you know all the introductory stuff, DSM-4. It's all pretty negative stuff. So I put that on her pillow and went to sleep. I guess that wasn't a good idea. Woke up the next day. She was quite surprised, happy that I had come as far as I had, but sort of like my sister, was really afraid to let anybody else know. She thought that doing a conference like this would cause a whole bunch of you to go to the president of the college that I work at, tell the president, and then I'd lose my job. But you also have to realize that she grew up during the Cultural Revolution in China, and people did lose their jobs for such reasons. But eventually she realized that that wouldn't happen, and that I had something to contribute, and supports me 100% for all of these conferences. I remember when I was writing my book, she was bugging me about finding a publisher. Finish it. You have to finish your book. It's like having a Chinese-Jewish mother all rolled up into one. And now she's hucking me a Chinik, you might say, to finish the next book, to finish my doctoral degree, all these things. So she's very supportive of what I'm doing at this time.
Very proud of you.
Yeah, she is.
Now, kids. Having kids.
Having kids. We both decided not to have kids. And the reason why is we just feel that our lifestyle is not set up for that.
You worried about any genetic issue?
I'm not. I feel if anyone should have an autistic kid, it should be me. Because I'll understand them. And I'll know how to work with them. But it's really more of just what we're doing with our lives. We spend an awful lot of time in school.
She's in a doctoral program.
She's in a doctoral program. You really need to have a good, stable income. At least we think. Maybe we're all wrong. But we'd like to, if we were to have kids, we'd really want to have a good, stable income to provide for them what they need. But there are thousands of autistic kids within bicycling distance of my home for me to take care of. So that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Reading music and reading words. Do you have reading music easier than reading words, or?
How did you start to use words?
Words, they seem to, once I got over the hurdle of regaining my verbal ability.
Gaining it for the first time, really. You didn't regain it. You didn't have it.
Well, I had some.
You had a little bit.
Yeah, it was going, until 18 months, I had 18 months worth of verbal
A
ability.
few words, dozen words or so, something like that.
Probably.
But no sentences.
I should ask my mother to be specific.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
She kept a nice diary on you.
Yeah. However much an 18-month-old child has of words is about how many I had. And maybe even a little bit more, and then the autism bomb hit.
Do you remember whether you were naming things? Or do you remember any interest in pointing what that, what this, what that? Do you remember any of that?
No, I don't remember any of that.
Check with your mom, see if you've
Yeah,
gone to
well.
that stage. But that's a
Right.
naming stage, which is really a prelude to language, real language development. And I wonder if you reached that level and then you lost it,
That'd be interesting. to
would it
find
be
out.
easier for you to get it back because you once had it?
Right.
So that probably you should check her out on that.
Yeah.
She's very good about keeping those
Yeah, she is.
those records. And in your third edition of your book, you may
That
want
will be the third edition.
Right.
Right. So where was I? Oh, reading. Now, once I got past that, I like to read.
In school, they said you didn't know how.
At school, they said I didn't know how to read, but I was reading the newspaper at home. And I think part of it has to do with interest. Part of it has to do with, I don't even remember what the other part was, but I like to read. I started reading music at age 6. I had a piano teacher who didn't know how to work with someone like me, but somehow it seemed to come pretty easily, yeah. I feel I can read music just as well as I can read text. And I enjoy reading. Sometimes it's challenges with comprehension. The act of reading I like a lot. Trying to remember all the little details, that can be difficult. I remember having difficulty in grade school with that.
We were looking at the ball game last night, the Yankees and the Red Sox, and Steve was initially quite disinterested until I started interpreting little parts of the game as, you know, as to what he was trying, what one person was trying to achieve and what his record was. And then what happened? You got more interested.
Yeah, it was much more interesting.
Yeah, but it's like you had to have it interpreted to you to bring it closer.
Right.
Is that what it was?
I think that explains it quite well, yeah.
And then you were actually able to sustain
And I could
interest in-
sustain interest in it because I knew what was going on. I had help, assistance in decoding all of the nonverbal communication that goes on in a baseball game.
Like you had, Garcia Parra has this obsessive compulsive thing with the...
That was fun to watch.
with the, and of course, we're
Hands
Red Sox
waving
fans,
over
so...
Yeah, animals can be great. I remember at first loving cats, I still do, but I was afraid of dogs.
Mhm.
Yeah, because dogs, they tend to be bigger, they move
Less predictable.
more sharply, they're less predictable, and God forbid they may lick your face. And I remember when my parents got a dog, I kept insisting, as only an autistic child can, I don't want this dog, it's not my dog, if you want a dog, you can have this dog, but I don't want this dog. Well, finally this dog and I became great friends. As we
With
talked about.
repetition, and
With
you were
repetition,
feeding the dog.
Feeding the dog, building a relationship. Animals are generally much more predictable than people,
Yes.
which is why autistic children often get along quite well with them.
We have time for, all right, 2 more questions, and then we'll be break for lunch. 3 questions, all right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Start with you first.
Yeah, I didn't get there, and I think that has to do with culture.
What was the question?
Autistic children getting along better with adults.
Okay.
And there are 3 reasons. One is people of a culture are intimately aware of how you're supposed to behave. If you're different, as a child, you get teased. If you're different as an adult, you usually don't get teased, but other people don't want to have much to do with you. So why was it that, as an adult, when I worked at a bank, all my friends were, say, from Ethiopia, India, or anywhere except from the United States? And I think that was because they were from another culture. And they didn't detect as many differences. If they did detect them, then they attributed it to culture. The third reason, again, probably which is most important, is that people of another culture have their own challenges in assimilating.
And they wouldn't pick up yours.
And if they do pick up the differences,
The-
they say, well, I have my own challenges. If someone's a little different, it's not that big a deal.
Besides, you're an American, so that's to be expected to be a little different anyhow, right?
That's right, yeah.
So we had a second question here, okay.
All right, so we're talking about seasonal differences, and do they have an effect on autistic children? Some yes, some no. I like all the seasons, including the dark ones, such as winter, but there are other children that may have, as I heard over here, seasonal affective disorder. And especially if they seem to be getting in a funk when it becomes fall and then winter, that's something worth investigating. The ocean is just one big system.
The rolling surf over and over again.
And you can also get a lot of vestibular proprioceptive sense input from the ocean.
You go in the surf, it knocks you over, you get up and knocked over again, you know, that's all.